This morning we are talking about a special series that we've had for a couple weeks now, and it is called Sex, God, and Us, in case you didn't get that from the large letters that were on the screen. And we want to tell you a little bit about what this series is about, and a little bit about what it's not about, so that we're all on the same page. The series is not about sort of what you can get away with in your sexuality. Okay, we're not going to be talking about that. It's not about judgment, so we're not looking to judge anyone. And it's not just a one-way conversation. It's more of a dialogue so that we can together discuss this super juicy topic. This series is about sex, God, and us, as we've said. And it's also about grace, redemption, and restoration. And so what we've done is we'll have some time in this room together. We'll talk about the topic for today, and then we'll break into discussion groups, so you'll have time to discuss with your small groups. So this morning, our topic is when sex goes wrong. All right. I can tell everyone's excited. Yeah, woo! All right. What do we mean by when sex goes wrong? What does that look like? What does that mean? Well, here are some symptoms of maybe ways that we would say in our society sex has gone wrong. The big one probably is pornography. Okay, that's not exactly awesome. Things like Girls Gone Wild, another way maybe sex has gone wrong. Even things like toddlers and tiaras. Okay, that's not a great example of how sex should be portrayed. Prostitution, sex trafficking, and even sexual abuse are all examples, a few of many, that sort of show us the symptoms of sex gone wrong. And so these things represent how sex has gone wrong, and this is just not how sex was created to be. So if we review from a couple weeks ago, looking at Genesis 1, when God created, when he was in creation mode, he created everything we know in the world. He created humans, and he also created sex. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. But it's not like God gets super awkward around sex and is like, ew, okay, I'm just going to close my eyes until they're done or something. Like, he created sex, and he thinks it's awesome. And God could have created sex any way he wanted. Like, if it was just about having babies, he could have actually just said, we're going to have a baby factory over here on this street, and when you're ready for a baby, just go ahead and order one and pick it up, and there you go, right? Or he could have said, whenever there's someone gives each other a high five, that's how, a baby is made. And so, obviously, in our context, we'd have a lot of babies, because we high-five a lot. But you can also see that a high-five or a picking up a baby at a factory is not really an intimate relationship between two people. It's more of just a function. And sex is more than a function. It's not just about making babies. That's one thing that comes of it. But it's also about that intimate relationship between the two people. And it's not just about that functionality, but it's about that intimate relationship. And if we think back to Adam and Eve in the garden, I think Aro discussed this at least last week or the week before, of this idea when Adam says, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Now that sounds a little awkward, right? Like, you probably wouldn't ask someone out and be like, hey, so you're kind of like bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Do you want to go out on Saturday? Like, that kind of seems a little awkward. But the idea of bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh is that these two humans were created to be in relationship and in partnership with one another in such an amazing way. And so bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh is like these two entities were part of one another. Like, when she felt pain, he felt pain, and vice versa. And when he was happy, she was happy. It was like they were sharing this intimate life together. And it was a beautiful connection between two committed people. That idea of for better or worse, it was real in the garden. And so you can imagine this sort of, in a way, perfect relationship that was between Adam and Eve. And that the sex that was created for them and intended for us was an amazing relationship, an intimate sort of encounter between the two of them. So when we compare this idea of bone of my bones with Girls Gone Wild, okay, we can see that something's gone wrong. Like, that is not the way that it's supposed to be. We're going to go through a couple passages this morning, and you have Bibles kind of on the ends of the rows you might need to share. But if you pass those along, and we're going to start in Genesis chapter 3. All right, Genesis chapter 3. I'm going to read this for us. It's a couple of quick verses. Genesis chapter 3, starting with verse 8. And I'm going to do a little bit of skipping here. All right, Genesis chapter 3, starting in 8. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" He said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." He said, "Who told you that you are naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" The man said, "The woman whom you gave me to be with, she gave me fruit from the tree, and I ate." Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent tricked me, and I ate." And then skip to verse 22. Then the Lord God said, "See, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And now he might reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man, and at the east Garden of Eden he placed a cherubim and a sword flaming and turning to guard the way to the tree of life. Okay, so you've probably heard this story before, but the ultimate sort of purpose of this passage in the Bible is to showcase the human rebellion against God. God created a world for us to live in, which was awesome and perfect, and we chose to not trust God with what he created. Basically, this passage, which is referred to as sort of the fall of humankind, sort of is us telling God, "You know what, I think I've got this. Like, I can do this life thing on my own. I'd rather not listen to you. Obviously, you're also holding things back from me, like this awesome tree with fruit." But it was more than just the fruit, right? It was a larger sort of idea that we're not trusting God with who we are, with what he created us to be. And so we basically told him in that moment that what you've given us actually isn't good enough, and I'm going to go in my own way and find something better. So thanks, but see ya. And since that time, things haven't been as awesome as the garden. We made that choice, and that's sort of the burden that we bear as humans. And that choice sort of influences the world around us. I mean, I doubt that we would see sort of, pornography in the Garden of Eden, because there was no reason for that to be there. We wouldn't see a Girls Gone Wild video. We wouldn't see sexual abuse, because those things don't make sense in the world of bone of my bones. So since this time, we're pretty much living in a sex gone wrong society. And when sex goes wrong, people get hurt, and it's not pretty. And we're going to take a look at one such instance in the Bible. So you're going to flip to 2 Samuel. Second Samuel chapter 13. We're going to actually read a big chunk of this chapter, and I'll just read it for us. But whether you have a Bible in front of you or not, just listen to the story of what happens. It's not really an awesome story. It's kind of a disgusting story, but it's an important thing for us to explore as we're looking at this topic of sex gone wrong. So 2 Samuel chapter 13, and I'm going to start in verse 1. Some time passed, David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And David's son Amnon fell in love with her. Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of David's brother Shemaiah. And Jonadab was a very crafty man. He said to him, "O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Jonadab said to him, "Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Let my sister Tamar come and give me something to eat and prepare the food in my sight so that I may see it and eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight so that I may eat from her hand." Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house where he was laying down. She took dough, kneaded it, made it into cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. Then she took the pan and set them out before him, but he refused to eat. Amnon said, "Send out everyone from me." So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the chamber so that I may eat from your hand." So Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. But when she brought them near him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come, lie with me, my sister." She answered him, "No, my brother, do not force me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do anything so vile. As for me, where could I carry my shame? As for you, you would be as one of the scoundrels in Israel. Now therefore I beg you, speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." But he would not listen to her, and being stronger than her, he forced her and lay with her. Then Amnon was seized with a very great loathing for her. Indeed, his loathing was even greater than the lust he had felt for her. Amnon said to her, "Get out." But she said to him, "No, my brother, for this is wrong in sending me away. It's greater than the other thing that you've done to me." But he would not listen to her. He called the young man who served him and said, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her." Now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for this is how the virgin daughters of the king were clothed in earlier times. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. But Tamar put ashes on her head and wore the long robe that she was wearing and put her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon, your brother, been with you? Be quiet for now, my sister, for he is your brother. Do not take this to heart." So Tamar remained a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. When King David heard of all these things, he became very angry, but he would not punish his son Amnon because he loved him, for he was his firstborn. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had raped his sister Tamar. All right. So this is a heavy one. Let's just recap what happened, because there were a lot of names in there that sometimes get confusing. We have Amnon, who is the son of King David. Remember who King David is in the Bible. He's a big deal. And he decides that his sister, now it could have been like a half-sister. It's not really known sort of what the bloodlines were. But it was someone close to him that, would not have been okay to sleep with. He has this, lust after her. She's a virgin, and he just wanted to sleep with her, period. And so he acted on that desire. And not only did he act it out, but he planned it and was sneaky about it. So he had her come and say, "Oh, I'm sick. Can you make me something to eat?" And she does, because she's obeying and being a nice sister. And then he sends everyone else out of the house and proposes to her this idea of, we should sleep together. She says no. And instead of listening to that, he uses his power and rapes her. So we go from bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh in the garden, to some dude raping his sister that's the son of King David. Not awesome, okay? This is where sex has gone wrong. And what's even worse, if there could be something worse, in this situation, when a person, like a girl, was a virgin and her virginity was taken away from her, and it wasn't through a marriage situation, if it's through a rape or something, the law stated that the guy that took her virginity was legally obligated to marry her, to care for her, because as a raped virgin, she probably would not be able to get married because she was seen as like not like clean or whatever. And so Amnon, he already did the dirty deed, and then legally he should marry her, at least take her into his home and care for her because he made this choice. But he doesn't. He throws her out onto the street like a piece of trash. And so really, Amnon uses Tamar in like the most disgusting way. He basically lusts after her beauty, tricks her into coming to his house, uses his strength to rape her, and it's pretty much just like a container for him to ejaculate in, because then he sends her away and basically ruins her life. And she has to go live with her other brother and basically lives as a widow. So this is a problem, okay? We go from bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, intimate, awesome connection, relationship between Adam and Eve, like the best relationship you could ever imagine. And not that far down the road, we have people raping their sisters and then throwing them on the street like a piece of trash. So this is a pretty serious issue. And you might say, what does that have to do with me today? Well, the way that we treat sexuality in our society and the way that our attitude is pretty much how Amnon treated Tamar. We use it, and then we throw it out like a piece of trash and think everything's totally cool. This story really illustrates the powerful connection that is between sex, power, and lust. And so let's talk about that for a sec. Lust is basically a passionate desire or craving for something that you probably shouldn't have. It's closely related to jealousy or greed, and it's basically a fixation on something that we don't have. And it can basically enslave us or own us. Lust is mostly tied to sexual desires, although you could lust sort of after anything based on this. You could like lust after like this amazing pair of boots that is like too expensive and I should never buy, but I love them or whatever, right? That kind of just like fixation or whatever. But you can see how when that fixation of something comes into the sexual realm, how like super intense that can be. And then lust usually sort of leads into power. And power is basically having control over something or someone. And so bone of my bones is basically the opposite of power. And so lust and power are basically insatiable, meaning that it always leaves us wanting more. So even if you're lusting after whatever it is, if you make the decision to use your power to get that thing, it's not like you're satisfied and life goes on. There's always something else that then you're lusting after, and it's a vicious cycle. And it kind of starts with small things, Like I doubt that Amnon, I don't really know him, so I don't know, but I just kind of doubt that he woke up one day and was like, you know what? I think today I'll rape my sister. That seems like a good use of my time. I think that probably for Amnon, like he had used his power in smaller things in his life, and he had given into his desires of lust for other things. And when it came to this issue with Tamar, it just seemed like the next thing that he was going to do, and that was just like his normal way of operating. It doesn't seem like he had a moment where he thought, this might not be a good idea, or like, raping my sister, let me think this one through, Like he just sort of went after what he wanted. And that's what sort of this life of lust and power can sometimes be. It can be blinding, and it's insatiable, and it's a problem. But sex was not intended for lust or power. But in a sex gone wrong world, ultimately, unfortunately, this is the reality. The culture of sex gone wrong is evasive, and it's like we can't escape it. Examples of sexual issues that we as humans have experienced since the fall is sex and sexual acts outside of marriage. Now, I know that last week you guys talked about what is sex, how far is too far. I would say that like those intimate acts of sexual desire that are outside of marriage would fall into this category. And, if you've ever had your mouth on a penis, or your bare hand has ever touched a breast and you're not a doctor, to me, I think those things are in the sexual realm, okay? Go ahead and figure it out for yourself, but I would say those are part of sexual desires. Other things that have happened as sexual issues since the fall: sex without relationship. So this idea of sort of like prostitution, or even like first date sex. You don't really have a relationship with this person, but that's cool, we'll have sex. Feeling empty after sexual encounters. You're not supposed to feel empty after a sexual encounter, okay? You're supposed to feel fulfilled and in love and in this trusting relationship with the other person. And a lot of times people will have sex in relationships to gain something, to prove something about their relationship, but in the end, it's more empty. That's not how it's created to be. And another issue that we've encountered since the fall is watching other people have sex. That's not really the way that God intended sex to be, to watch other people have sex and then somehow have that, be a desire on your own to then have sex with someone or yourself. That's not really what God had intended. But this type of sexual activity has become the norm. I just picked up a couple magazines at the store the other day. So this is Glamour, women's magazine, and it's the Guides in Sex issue. So there's basically several pages that talk all about like what guys want in sexual encounters with women. And so I guess they do a survey like every year or something, so they're comparing and contrasting what guys like. And it's basically sort of giving women information on how to play the game of sex and how to make themselves more attractive to the opposite sex, which in the Garden of Eden, that wasn't an issue. Adam and Eve loved each other, and Eve didn't have to go on a diet or do her hair a certain way or wear a certain type of shoe or whatever. Like, they just loved each other. Then we have GQ. I don't think that this magazine cover would make it in the Garden of Eden, just thinking. And this issue has conveniently just went ahead and listed for us a lust list. So if you're not sure who to lust after, like if you like need some help and some ideas, they have provided you a list. How nice, GQ, thank you. I'm sure that so many guys out there have just been banging their heads against the wall thinking, I have all this sexual energy, I need to lust after something. Who should I lust after? I mean, right here, for $5, you can find out who to lust after. But I show you this because it's like the norm now, okay? Like, it's not like it's in this corner that some people have to deal with these sexual issues. Like, it's the way that we operate in our world. And so that's really tough for us, right? How are we expected to make choices with our sexuality based on an ancient ideal that's from an ancient book about a story of two people in a garden a really long time ago? Like, surely we can't be expected to make choices today in our sexuality that would resemble that type of relationship. Well, maybe, maybe not. Let's talk about your largest and most important sex organ, your brain. For real, though. Your brain is actually the most important sexual organ that we have. And here's some pretty interesting information about the brain. First of all, our brain is moldable and adaptable. So you're born with a brain, but things that happen in your life and experiences that you have change the way that your brain functions throughout your life, which is basically amazing. The way that our brains work, we have neurons, support cells, synapses, and neurochemicals. And all of these things work together to send us messages about what's happening in the world around us. And some of these things are sort of survival messages, right? So like the stress chemical cortisol tells us when we're in danger. And so like if you were in the forest and a huge bear was coming to eat you, your body would signal your brain, your brain would send a signal to your body to say, run, this is not a good situation, you know. And so we've set that up, like that's the way that our brains are designed, so that we can respond to situations appropriately. Well, here are some of the neurochemicals that happen when we're in sexual encounters or relationships. So there's 3 important neurochemicals. One is called dopamine, which you've probably heard about. It's the reward or like the feel-good chemical. So like when you do something that is good, or that you have like maybe sometimes in a rush of adrenaline, or it's like a happy feeling or an exciting feeling, that is the dopamine in your brain telling you, yeah, this is awesome, kind of thing, okay? But the thing about dopamine is that it's value neutral, which means the dopamine isn't making the moral choices for you on what sends the signal to say this is awesome. So like you could like be a shoplifter, right? And there's like some thrill into like stealing clothes or something and sticking them in your jacket and running out and being like, yes, I got away with it again, you know? And your brain would be like flooded with dopamine. But that's not necessarily a good thing, right? Like shoplifting isn't really like a positive thing that I would encourage you to take up as a hobby, okay? But your brain doesn't really have that in the dopamine center. It doesn't really make that value judgment. It just sort of goes along with the adrenaline rush and all that stuff, and it bathes your brain in like, whoa, this feels good. We also have oxytocin. Both genders have oxytocin, but it's actually more prevalent and primarily in the female. Basically, this is the chemical that is the bonding chemical. And so this is what allows women to bond with their babies, like their newborns. It helps in childbirth, and it also is present in sexual intercourse. And so there is a chemical in your brain that tells your body, this is someone that's important and special to me, and I want to make long, lasting, trusting bonds with this person. And so it's what creates sort of the mother-child relationship that's so important, and it's also what creates the partner sexual intercourse relationship that is so important. There's also one more called vasopressin, and this is sort of the male version of oxytocin, and it allows the male to bond with the sexual partner and with children that they have. It's a different way that it works than oxytocin, but it's kind of the same idea. So we have dopamine and then these bonding chemicals in our brains. Now when you have just like casual sexual encounters, you're creating patterns in your brain that will reduce the bonding experience with one long-term partner. And so when you have a sexual encounter, your body, your brain, is flooding you with all these chemicals because when you have a sexual encounter, it feels good and you're starting to bond with this person. But the problem is that when it's not in like a committed relationship, hopefully for your life, what you're doing is creating patterns in your brain to sort of stop that short. And so you have a sexual encounter with someone, but it's like, you know, who knows who it is. It's not someone you're spending the rest of your life with. Hey, I'm just having fun at a party here, people. Give me a break. Well, you're creating these patterns in your brain that start this bonding, but then pull back. And then you do that with someone else, and then you pull back. And then you do that with someone else. And so you're sort of giving yourself less of a chance to have that intimate bonding experience with your one lifelong partner when that time comes. My guess is most of us in the room would like want to have a marriage relationship that's awesome, that might be somewhat close to the Adam and Eve thing. And so some of the choices that people are making in their lives in their singlehood are affecting their long-term relationships because of the way these things work. Now let me be clear. Sex drive is normal and healthy. Without a sex drive, humankind would be extinct, okay? So we need a sex drive. But we have the choice of how we respond to natural desires. And just because you have the desire doesn't mean you act on it. In a sex gone wrong world, the norm is to act on sexual desires and impulses. That's like what our society tells us. That's what everyone's doing. But just because it's socially acceptable does not mean that you should do it. Because you are in charge of your own sexuality. God has given us the freedom of choice. Oftentimes, freedom is seen as the ability to do whatever you want and have fun while you're doing it. But freedom isn't actually about having whatever we crave. True freedom is going without what we want and being okay with it. And God gives us the power to do that even in our sexuality. Woo! That is Sex Gone Wrong. You are now dismissed.